Picture this. It's March 15th, 44 BC. The most powerful man in the world wakes up in his villa, unaware that in just a few hours, he'll be lying in a pool of his own blood, betrayed by his closest friends. 23 stab wounds, 60 conspirators, one man's ambition that changed the course of history forever. But here's what most people don't know. Julius Caesar saw it coming. The signs were everywhere. His wife's nightmares, the soothsayer's warnings, even the sacrificial animals seemed to scream danger. So why did he walk into that Senate house anyway? Why did the man who conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon ignore every single warning that death was waiting for him? The truth is far stranger than fiction. And tonight, we're going to uncover the real story behind the most famous assassination in history. Because Caesar's death wasn't just about politics or power, it was about something much darker. To understand Caesar's horrific end, we need to go back to the beginning. Julius Caesar wasn't born to rule the world. He was born into a Rome that was tearing itself apart. In 100 BC, the Roman Republic was a powder keg ready to explode. The old ways were dying. Senators who once served the people now served themselves. Generals fought each other for scraps of power, while ordinary Romans starved in the streets. Into this chaos stepped a young man with piercing eyes and an ego that matched his ambition. Caesar was different from other Roman nobles. He understood something his peers didn't. The people were hungry for a hero. While other senators gave boring speeches about tradition, Caesar gave them bread and spectacle. While they talked about the good old days, Caesar promised a golden future. But Caesar's rise came at a cost. Every victory made him more enemies. Every triumph brought him closer to danger. By 49 BC, when he crossed the Rubicon River and declared war on the Roman Senate, Caesar had already signed his own death warrant. He just didn't know it yet. The civil war that followed was brutal. Romans fought Romans. Brothers killed brothers. Cities burned, while Caesar chased his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. When the dust settled, Caesar stood alone atop the ruins of the Republic. He had won everything. But victory, as they say, has a price. And that price was about to come due in the most brutal way imaginable. By 44 BC, Julius Caesar was no longer just a man. He was an idea, a symbol, a god walking among mortals. The Senate had given him powers no Roman had ever possessed. He was dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. The most dangerous title in the most dangerous city in the world. But here's what's terrifying. Caesar didn't want to stop there. Ancient sources tell us he was planning something that would have horrified every Roman alive. He wanted to be king. Now, to understand why this mattered, you need to know that Romans had one rule above all others. Never again would they bow to a king. They'd rather die than live under monarchy. Their ancestors had thrown out the last king over 400 years earlier, and the very word rex, king, was like poison on Roman tongues. Yet Caesar kept dropping hints. He wore the red boots of ancient kings. He sat on a golden throne. Most shocking of all, he allowed people to worship him as a living god. Statues of Caesar appeared in temples next to Jupiter himself. This wasn't just arrogance. This was heresy. The signs of his growing megalomania were everywhere. When a senator refused to stand as Caesar passed, Caesar had him stripped of his office. When priests warned that the omens were bad for his planned military campaign, Caesar dismissed them. He even joked that he was greater than the gods themselves. But the most chilling moment came just weeks before his death. A man in the crowd called out Rex, King. Caesar's response was swift and cold. "I am Caesar, not Rex." But the way he said it, witnesses claimed, suggested he was thinking about it. Seriously thinking about it. The senators were watching. They were listening, and they were planning. What Caesar didn't realize was that with every godlike gesture, with every kingly privilege he claimed, he was giving his enemies exactly what they needed: justification for murder. In the shadows of Rome, a conspiracy was brewing. Not a simple plot hatched by a few angry senators, but something far more complex and terrifying. This was a web of betrayal that reached into every corner of Caesar's life. The ringleader was Marcus Brutus. And this is where the story gets truly dark. Brutus wasn't just any senator. He was Caesar's protege, his surrogate son. Some whispered he might even be Caesar's biological child, the result of Caesar's long affair with Brutus's mother. If true, it would make this the most twisted family drama in history. But Brutus had a problem. His ancestor, the first Brutus, had been the founder of the Roman Republic. He was the man who'd driven out the last king. For this Brutus to allow Caesar to become king would be the ultimate betrayal of his family legacy. The pressure was eating him alive. Then came Cassius, the mastermind. Where Brutus was tormented by honor, Cassius was driven by pure, cold hatred. He'd watched Caesar rise while his own career stagnated. He'd seen mediocre men promoted over him simply because they flattered Caesar. Cassius didn't just want Caesar dead. He wanted Caesar to suffer. The conspiracy grew like a cancer. Senators, generals, even Caesar's friends joined the plot. 60 men in total, 60 daggers waiting in the darkness. They called themselves the Liberators, but they were really something much simpler: murderers. Here's what makes their plan so chilling. They weren't content with just killing Caesar. They wanted to destroy him completely. They chose the Ides of March, March 15th, because it was a day of religious significance. They planned to do it in Pompey's theater, at the feet of Pompey's statue, as the ultimate insult. Caesar would die looking up at the statue of the man he'd destroyed. But the most horrifying detail? They made sure Caesar would see it coming. They wanted him to know in his final moments that everyone he trusted had betrayed him. They wanted his last emotion to be not just pain, but the crushing realization that he was utterly, completely alone. The trap was set. The date was chosen. The weapons were sharpened. All they needed now was for Caesar to walk into their web. If Julius Caesar had paid attention to the warnings, he would have lived. But pride, they say, comes before the fall, and Caesar's pride was about to kill him. The omens started weeks before the assassination. In ancient Rome, reading signs from the gods wasn't superstition, it was science. Priests called haruspices would examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, looking for divine messages. And what they saw in the days leading up to March 15th terrified them. The liver of every sacrificial bull came up diseased. The hearts were malformed. One priest claimed he found no heart at all in a sacrifice meant for Caesar's health. In Roman religion, this was the equivalent of the gods screaming, "Danger, death, stay home." But Caesar dismissed them all. He'd grown too powerful to fear the gods. Then came the human warnings, and these are even more disturbing. A soothsayer named Spurinna approached Caesar in the street. This wasn't some random fortune teller. Spurinna was famous throughout Rome for his accurate predictions. He grabbed Caesar's arm and whispered the words that would become legend: "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar laughed it off. But according to witnesses, his laugh seemed forced, hollow, like a man trying to convince himself he wasn't afraid. The most haunting warning came from the person who knew Caesar best, his wife, Calpurnia. The night before the assassination, Calpurnia had a nightmare so vivid, so terrifying, that she woke up screaming. In her dream, she was holding Caesar's bloodied body in her arms. She saw him dying, saw the life drain from his eyes, felt his blood on her hands. When she told Caesar about the dream, she begged him not to leave the house. She grabbed his toga, tears streaming down her face, and pleaded with him to postpone the Senate meeting. For a moment, Caesar wavered. Ancient sources tell us he actually considered staying home. But then, his pride kicked in. How would it look if the great Julius Caesar was afraid of a woman's nightmare? How would his enemies mock him? So he made the decision that would seal his fate. He would go to the Senate. He would show Rome that Caesar feared nothing. There's one more omen that's often overlooked, but it might be the most chilling of all. That morning, as Caesar walked to the Senate house, a teacher of rhetoric named Artemidorus tried to hand him a scroll. This wasn't just any document. It was a complete list of the conspirators and their plan. Artemidorus pushed through the crowd, desperate to reach Caesar. "Read this immediately," he shouted. "It concerns you personally." Caesar took the scroll. Victory was literally in his hands. All he had to do was read it. But the crowd was pressing around him. Petitioners were grabbing at his toga. And Caesar, ever the showman, decided the scroll could wait. He never read it. The warning that could have saved his life was crushed in his hand as he walked into the theater that would become his tomb. March 15th, 44 BC, the day that would change the world forever. Caesar woke up in his villa on the Palatine Hill, unaware that he had only hours left to live. The morning started normally enough. Caesar performed his daily rituals, received visitors, handled correspondence. But something was different. Servants later said he seemed distracted, almost melancholy. He kept looking toward the door, as if expecting someone who never came. Around midday, Caesar began his journey to the Senate meeting. The location wasn't the traditional Senate house. That was being renovated. Instead, they were meeting in Pompey's theater complex, in a hall behind the stage. The irony was lost on no one. Caesar would die in the shadow of his greatest enemy. As his litter carried him through the streets of Rome, Caesar must have felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This wasn't just another Senate meeting. He was planning to ask for permission to wage war in Parthia, the last great enemy of Rome. If successful, it would make him richer and more powerful than any Roman in history. But the conspirators were already in place. 60 men, their togas hiding daggers, were waiting in the hall. They'd positioned themselves carefully. Some blocked the exits. Others surrounded the chair where Caesar would sit. The rest formed a human wall to hide what was about to happen from any witnesses. When Caesar arrived at the theater, he encountered Spurina again, the soothsayer who'd warned him to beware the Ides of March was standing by the entrance. Caesar, feeling confident, called out mockingly, "The Ides of March have come." Spurina's reply was ice cold. "Yes, they have come, but they have not yet passed." Caesar entered the hall. He took his seat. The trap was sprung. What happened next is burned into history. But the details are more horrifying than most people realize. The attack began with a petitioner approaching Caesar with a false request. As Caesar leaned forward to listen, the man grabbed his toga and pulled it down from his shoulders, the signal for the attack to begin. The first dagger belonged to Servilius Casca. It struck Caesar in the neck, but the blow was clumsy, fueled more by nerves than skill. Caesar spun around, grabbed Casca's wrist, and stabbed him with his staff. For a moment, it looked like Caesar might fight his way out. He was still strong, still quick, still the warrior who'd conquered Gaul. But then he saw them. All around him, senators were drawing daggers. Men he'd trusted, men he'd promoted, men he'd called friends. The attack became a frenzy. They didn't take turns. They all rushed him at once. In their desperation to participate in the killing, they stabbed each other as often as they stabbed Caesar. Blood sprayed across the marble floor. Caesar's toga was shredded. His body was pierced again and again. But Caesar kept fighting. He fought for his life with the fury of a cornered lion, until he saw one face among his attackers. A face that broke his heart and his spirit in the same instant. Marcus Brutus, his beloved Brutus, was standing there with a bloody dagger in his hand. According to the historian Suetonius, Caesar had been fighting back with everything he had. But when he saw Brutus among his killers, he stopped. He covered his head with his toga and spoke his final words. Not the famous et tu, Brute of Shakespeare, but something in Greek that cuts even deeper. Kai su teknon, you too, my child. Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue. The blood from his 23 wounds pooled around the marble feet of his dead enemy. The most powerful man in the world died alone, betrayed by everyone he trusted, staring up at the statue of a man he destroyed. The Ides of March had claimed their victim. But this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something far worse. The conspirators thought they were saving Rome. Instead, they doomed it. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, Rome descended into chaos. The senators had no plan beyond killing Caesar. They seemed to think that once the dictator was dead, the Republic would magically return to the way things used to be. They were catastrophically wrong. The Roman people didn't celebrate Caesar's death. They mourned it. He'd been their champion, their provider, their god. When word spread that Caesar had been murdered, riots broke out across the city. The conspirators had to barricade themselves on the Capitoline Hill, while mobs searched the streets for anyone connected to the plot. But the real horror was just beginning. Caesar's assassination didn't restore the Republic, it destroyed it forever. Within days, 3 men emerged to claim Caesar's legacy. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Lepidus, Caesar's master of horse. They called themselves the Second Triumvirate, and their first act was to compile death lists. What followed was a bloodbath that made Caesar's assassination look merciful. The triumvirs systematically hunted down and murdered everyone connected to the conspiracy. But they didn't stop there. They killed senators who'd opposed Caesar. They killed senators who'd supported him. They killed anyone wealthy enough to fund their enemies or powerful enough to threaten their rule. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator and a vocal opponent of the triumvirate, was caught trying to flee Italy. Antony's soldiers cut off his head and hands and nailed them to the speaker's platform in the forum. Antony's wife reportedly pulled out Cicero's tongue and stabbed it repeatedly with her hairpins. The proscription lists grew longer every day. Fathers informed on sons. Brothers betrayed brothers. Rome became a city of corpses and informants. As for the conspirators themselves, their fates were uniformly grim. Most died in the civil wars that followed. Cassius and Brutus, the masterminds of the plot, committed suicide after their armies were defeated at the Battle of Philippi. But even in death, they couldn't escape Caesar's shadow. Legend says that before his suicide, Brutus saw Caesar's ghost, who whispered, "We'll meet again at Philippi." The ghost was right. Within 13 years of Caesar's death, Every major conspirator was dead. The Roman Republic they died trying to save was replaced by an empire ruled by Caesar's heir, who took the name Augustus and became Rome's first emperor. The senators who'd killed Caesar to prevent him from becoming king had instead created a dynasty of emperors that would rule for centuries. The republic they'd murdered Caesar to preserve died with him in that blood-soaked theater. So here we are, more than 2,000 years later, still haunted by the question that has no easy answer. Were the conspirators heroes or villains? They saw themselves as liberators, saving Rome from tyranny. But their liberation came at the cost of civil war, mass murder, and the destruction of everything they claimed to protect. They killed one dictator and created an empire of them. Maybe the real tragedy isn't that Caesar died, but that he had to die alone, betrayed by everyone he trusted, abandoned by everyone he loved, dying at the feet of an enemy's statue while his friends' daggers pierced his flesh. Or maybe the real tragedy is that his death changed nothing. The Rome that Caesar built outlasted the Rome that killed him. His name became the word for emperor in dozens of languages: Kaiser, Tsar, Caesar, while the names of his killers are remembered only as synonyms for betrayal. The Ides of March remind us that power corrupts, but absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it consumes. It consumed Caesar. It consumed his killers. It consumed the republic they all claimed to serve. Perhaps that's the lesson we should take from these horrific final days. That when we create gods out of men, we shouldn't be surprised when other men decide those gods need to die. And we shouldn't be surprised when the gods' deaths create more monsters than they destroy. The blood has long since dried from the marble floors of Pompey's theater. But the questions Caesar's assassination raised about power, loyalty, and the price of ambition are as fresh as ever. Because human nature hasn't changed since 44 BC. We still create heroes. We still destroy them. We still pay the price. What would you have done on the Ides of March? Would you have stood with Caesar? Or would you have drawn your dagger with the rest? The answer might tell you more about yourself than you want to know. If this story fascinated you as much as it did us, there are more dark chapters of Roman history waiting to be uncovered. The rise and fall of emperors, the secrets of the gladiatorial games, the mysteries that still baffle historians today. Subscribe to join us as we continue exploring the shadows of the ancient world, where truth is stranger than fiction and history's greatest mysteries are waiting to be solved.